like to study today is basically one of the one of the there's so many beautiful stories in this portion. First of all, it's great to see so many of you. I haven't seen you since before the holidays, and it's great to have everybody here. Baruch Hashem. Um, there's so many beautiful stories here, but one of the stories I was especially struck by a point made yesterday by Rabbi Mark Gittler. Yesterday, our Tanakh group finished with Rabbi Gittler studying every single chapter of the Tanakh, 929 chapters, and a great group, inspirational group of Torah scholars met every single day, or almost every day for over 3 years, nearly 4 years, and more than 3 years. And one of the points that Rabbi Gittler made was that the Torah ends, or the Tanakh ends, or part of, certainly the Book of Kings ends, with the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And who are the ones who destroyed the Beit HaMikdash? Bavel. And Bavel appears in this week's parsha, the Tower of Bavel. So what I'd like to do is read the short paragraph about the Tower of Bavel, read Rashi on it, read some of the commentaries, and also share one of the ideas I had about it. So it's chapter 11, verse 1. It's just a few psukim. It's a very, very powerful passage, but it's really only 9 psukim, the origin of the name Bavel. It says by chapter 11, verse 1. The whole world was one language and of one unified dvarim achadim. Let's see what that means, Rashi says. Rashi says one language, Lashon HaKodesh. The whole world spoke the holy tongue, which is Hebrew. Why is it a holy tongue? This is a dispute between Nachmanides and Maimonides. Maimonides says it's because the Hebrew language in its pure form, not modern day Hebrew, but in its pure biblical form, doesn't have any vulgar words. There are no vulgar words. The words are all written in a pristine manner. For example, they'll say that rather than referring to mating, they'll say use euphemisms for these words, or rather than referring to the male part of the body, they'll just simply call it the male part of the body. So that's what Maimonides says. Nachmanides says that it's holy because it was used by God to do holy things. The She'erit Yaakov states a different explanation, that all languages other than Hebrew with which God created the world are hybrids. They're composed of original elements and words adopted from other languages. But the only language that could be called one language without any foreign traces is the Holy Tongue, which is Hebrew. There are certain words in the Torah which come from other languages. For example, Lavan and Yaakov make a treaty, and they do it on a pile of stones, and it's called Yigar Sadusa. Or else the tefillin is called Totafot, and Rashi says it comes from an African word. So there are some words, but by and large, this is the concept. So, udvarim achadim, the whole world was one language and one unified. What does that mean? Bo beitzah achat. They had one plan of action, and they said, "Lo kol heimenu." God does not have the right sheyavor lo et alyonim. God does not have the right to select for himself alone the upper realms. Nala rakia, let's go up there and make war for him. Meaning to say they had one unified plan. but their plan was problematic. They said they want to wage war against God. Alternatively, Varim Achadim, Ayichudo Shalom. They wanted to wage war against God, the Yichudo, the one who is the one of the world. Alternatively, Dvarim Achadim, they said once every 1656 years, the heavens collapse, just like God did in the days of the flood. Let's make support for it, for the heavens. So the first two approaches, they're arguing either they wanted to wage war against God, or they wanted to challenge the unique one. Okay, so the story continues. And they traveled towards the east. They found the valley Be'eretz Shinar. So they found the valley in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Verse 3. Each one said to his friend, let's make bricks, we'll burn them together, put them in the fire. And the brick served as stone. And basically, the chemar, which is basically like it's this building material, became for them for the mortar, for the cement. So, hold on one second. Basically, we don't really know exactly what type of materials these are. Some say it's like mud, who knows exactly. But anyway, so what they said to each friend, each one said to their friend, let's build the bricks. So Rashi says, one nation to another nation. Egypt said to Cush, Cush to Put, Put to Canaan. They said, let's Hava Hazminu Atzmachem, prepare yourselves. They prepared themselves and joined together for work or for a plan. Why do they have to build bricks? Rashi says, because there are no stones in Babylonia. In Babylonia, they didn't have Jerusalem stone, so they had to use bricks. They said, let's build a city. Let's build a city. With a tower and its head in heaven. Let's make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered across the whole earth. Let's build a city lest we be scattered across the whole earth. She says, why were they worried about being scattered? They didn't want God to disperse them. So they said, let's build a big tower. And God goes down to see the city and the tower that man built there. Asher banu bnei Adam. And God said, let's see, first God goes down, this teaches us a judge has to go and judge the people. He can't do it from afar. And they said, let's see the tower that the people built there. Why does it call them the sons of man? You think they're sons of donkey? It means to say that they were sons, that they were following this negative character trait of Adam. Adam denied God's benevolence because he blamed his wife for the mistake. Also, these two were denying God's benevolence by rebelling against the one who did good for them and who rescued them from the flood. God says, behold, there's one language for all of them. And this is just their beginning. They won't be able to be stopped from everything they're trying to do. This is just the beginning, they're saying. Rashi says, Kol tova zo yeshi mahen. They have all of this goodness, sha'am echadim, because they're one people. Meaning to say, is this verse a praise of them or a criticism? It means that it's both. God is praising them for being united, but he's also worried. Meaning to say, the Talmud says that which generation was worse, the generation of the flood or the generation of the Tower of Babel? And the Talmud says the generation of the flood was worse because at least the generation of the Tower of Bavel, at least they got along with each other. They had unity. We really still haven't said what their major sin was. According to Rashi at the beginning, it seems like their sin was that they wanted to attack God or wage war against God, but there's not strong evidence here. It seems that there was a fear, a different fear. So, and I'm going to ask you in a moment, what was the big fear of this generation? Verse 7, it says, Hava nerda v'navla sham sefasam. Let's go down and mix up their tongues, mix up their language. Asher lo yishmu ish sefas re'eh, so they won't understand. She says, God says, measure for measure. They say, let's build a tower. So God says against them, let's go down and mix them up. The word navla comes from bilbel, to confuse. Asher lo yishmu ish sefas re'eh. Nobody will understand. This guy would ask for a brick, and the other person would give him mud. This guy would ask for mud, and the guy would give him a brick, so they get into a fight. Right? She says he'd split open his brain. This caused them to start to fight. Hashem osam misham al pnei kol haaretz. So God scattered them over the earth, and they ceased to build a city. Therefore, al kain karashima Bavel. Therefore, it's called Babylon. Ki sham below Hashem sfat kol haaretz. There God scattered the languages all over the earth. There God scattered them over the earth. Rashi says, this is what I cited before. Rashi says, this teaches us that they have no portion in the world to come. We learned that in the Gemara in Sanhedrin 107b, in the Mishnah and the Gemara. And which is worse, the generation of the flood or the generation of the Tower of Bavel? The sin of the generation of the flood was not characterized by a lack of belief in God, but by a lack of an ability to control their desires, their lust. Whereas the sin of the Tower of Bavel, they directly attacked God. They wanted to wage war against him. Whereas the sin of the generation of the flood, they were washed away, while the generation of Bavel, they weren't washed away. They were just sent around the world. So it must be that the generation of the flood was worse because they were robbers and they were fighting with each other. Therefore, they were obliterated. Whereas the Tower of Babel, even though they were attacking God, at least they had friendship amongst themselves. We see from here that conflict is hateful and peace is great. Sanoya machoket v'gadol hashalom. Let me just pause for a second here because I want to ask you a question. What do you think was the sin of the generation of Bavel? And what are we being taught here by saying that this is the origins of the Babylon story? It's a compound question. What was their sin? And what's the purpose of this being the origins of Babylon? We heard some very good, some excellent answers. But the answers raise some more questions because one of the theories is, well, and this is the way I've always studied it, which is they should have been scattered because Hashem said, go out and multiply. Well, by them building a tower, you could see that they weren't really fulfilling that, but you could also say they were. I mean, development. They were building a skyscraper. That's development. That's filling the earth, literally filling the earth. And they say, let's make a name for ourselves. Naselanu shame. What's wrong with that? That's not, I mean, you can read it all, that's egotistical, but it's also what prophet says, that you will make a name, Yad Vashem, you will make a name for yourself, a lasting memorial. We want to make an impact on the earth. We don't want to just be here and leave the world without any impact. So I'm not saying that that's not the right answer. I'm just saying that it raises other questions. And I want to go back and say, so what's the concern here? What's the concern? Why did they want to be unified? It says the whole world was one language and of common mind. What's the problem with being unified? So the problem is, before we get to that, God was trying to prevent a disaster. So what did he do? He scattered them in this place with all these different languages. And that's why this place is called Bavel. So it says at the end, verse 9, Alkein Karashma Bavel. That's why it's called Bavel. The problem with this is this didn't work. God's plan didn't work. God wanted to save the world from whatever they were doing, but Bavel ends up becoming the source of destruction in the world. Bavel is what destroys the temple. As those of us who study the Tanakh, it comes to the end of the Bible, end of the narrative. Babylon destroys the Beit HaMikdash. The Beit HaMikdash, the temple, was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuzaradan. But we can even go a step further. What is the purpose of the Beit HaMikdash? What's the purpose of the Beit HaMikdash? What's the ultimate end goal of the temple? Who is supposed to worship in the temple? Who is supposed to worship in the temple? Anyone want to say? Who is the temple for? Who is the temple for, Joyce?
The Jews. The temple houses the ark, which houses the Ten Commandments. Nothing less than the Ten Commandments. When God entered the material world. I mean,
yes, the temple is for the Jews. The temple houses the Ten Commandments. The temple is where God enters the world. But ultimately, who is the temple for? Is the temple only for the Jews ultimately?
No, because we're supposed to be a priesthood for
all the nations. And what does the prophet say? What does the prophet of Isaiah say? Ki veiti beiti karei l'chol ha'amim. My house will be a house
for all people.
To call out to God for all the people. And on that day, Bayomahu, on that day, Yashem Echad, Ushmo Echad. The whole world will recognize on that day the unity of God. So ultimately, what they're trying to do here in the Tower of Bavel, of being united, and I see a couple of hands up, and we'll get to in a second. Let me just finish this sentence. Ultimately, what they're doing here of trying to be united, isn't that the goal? Isn't that the goal of the world? Isn't the goal of the world to ultimately be united? Isn't the goal of the world to have the temple? And so what did God accomplish here by scattering them when they had this unity? As Rashi notes, they liked each other. They had unity. So what were they missing? Hold on, let me pause for a second. I have a couple of questions and I'll come back to finish this. So basically, question is, why is God scattering the people? Why does he have to create different languages? If the ultimate goal is unity, why did he scatter everyone with different languages? If he was just worried, he could have just scattered them, but it makes it so much harder to come back. Makes it so much harder to come back. Baruch Hashem, I'm going to share something with you which might not be popular. I'm going to share something which is maybe not popular, but I'm going to share it. A lot of people talk about unity as something that we need. But the truth is, unity can be extremely dangerous. Let me just give you, just to make this a very clear example. Think about the United Nations. When you say the United Nations right now is a net positive for the world, I mean, I'm no expert on the United Nations, but certainly for the Jewish people, they don't seem to be a net positive. They spend all their time criticizing Israel, they don't walk out when any other prime minister gets up to speak, only the Israeli prime minister. They spend most of their time, the quote unquote United Nations, uniting against the Jewish people. Unity is a good thing, as Thera, I think, mentioned, if you're uniting with the right purpose and the right intent. But unity is extraordinarily dangerous if you're uniting without the right goal. Then it becomes a force of destruction. And the issue is, if you unite before you're ready to unite, you have major problems. And so the point here is that the unity was coming before there was an understanding of A, why we're being unified, and B, the power of unity. So that's the basic concept, is we weren't ready for unity in the world. The unity, when we're not ready for it, causes damage and destruction. And I mean, when you think about a lot of times when now I'm just like a quasi activist. I'm not really an activist anymore. I used to be an activist. Now I save it for really special occasions. When I was a real firebrand activist, people will always say to me, no, we need to have unity in the Jewish people. Unity is important, but it's also sometimes destructive and damaging. And it's not the most important value. The most important value has to be about serving Hashem. So unity can be a dangerous form. And I mean, just to give a gross example, you look at Nazi Germany, there was a lot of unity there. Everybody marching together with the parades, with the uniforms, looking, wanting a uniform culture. That's the danger of unity. So our job as Jews was to be not the unity, to be the voice of dissent, to be the Avram who was Lech Lecha, to leave the land, to go there, and to talk about Hashem, to be almost the gadfly in the room. So that was the problem. The problem is, if we're not ready for unity and we have unity, then it's dangerous. So that's why Hashem says, to go back to I think, forget, too many beautiful ideas to remember who said what. But that's why there needed to be multiple languages, because otherwise we weren't going to have any growth, because everybody would be an echo chamber, and we weren't ready to have the message. So the idea that like the majority of the world, or even the world, is unified, I mean, my experience the last 2 years tells me that that's not necessarily a good thing. And that's what I think this passage is warning us about. So that's what I wanted to share at the beginning. And that's why Bavel becomes the source of destruction. That's why Bavel becomes the place of the ultimate destruction. Where does the world get destroyed? It gets destroyed from a place where they had unity for the wrong purpose, or unity with the wrong unity before we were ready. So That's the first idea that I wanted to share. There's some. First of all, let me just pause for a second. Does anybody have any comments on that? Okay. So now that we shared that, yes, hold on. Let's just talk a little bit about the tower. I found this beautiful book in Rabbi Ben Mintz's basement. I love his basement. I could just get lost down there for years. And nowadays there's so many beautiful publications by Art Scroll, but this was an old one from 1977. They wrote just a book on Noach, and I figure if I don't use it this week, when am I going to use it? To wait a year. So they have a whole commentary on the on every single word. The whole book is very thick, very thick. So they talk about the Tower of Bavel and let us make a name for ourselves. And they try to figure out what the problem is. So let me just read their commentary and we'll see if you have any thoughts on it. They say, let's build a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. So according to Radak, this is what it means: a city for living and a tower from which they could oversee their flocks from a distance. So the purpose of the tower, according to the commentaries, was not to see God, but to look at their own money, to count their money. It would also serve as a beacon so that the shepherds could find their location. Shepherds could find their location from far away without fear of getting lost. It doesn't sound like a sin. I mean, it sounds like they want to keep an eye on their stuff.
Not only that, we're doing that now with airplanes or helicopters.
I mean, we're drones. I mean, this is not necessarily something bad. So let's see what the next commentary is, and we'll make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed across the whole earth. So this is the key phrase. Let's see what they say here. Make a name was their reason for building their tower, lest we be dispersed was their reason for building the city. Okay, that's, again, not, it doesn't sound like, first of all, like, what here is the problem with saying that they have no share in the world to come? So this is what the Bechor Shor says. They wanted to acquire a name because the popularity of the tower would spread from afar, giving them fame. So they wanted fame. They wanted to be internet sensations. They wanted to go viral. Chizkuni has something a little bit more sinister. They wanted to gain mastery over the entire human race. The frame of the tower would spread and all would come to see it. The fame of the tower would spread. So they wanted to get mastery. Hirsch, now all of a sudden we're going to the modern period, right? We don't have anything in between that's satisfactory for them. Hirsch says that their intent was to establish themselves. So this is the difference. This is the crucial difference. This answers the question. It says, they did not want to call on others b'shem Hashem, in the name of God, but they wanted to make the name for themselves. They didn't want to say b'shem Hashem, but they wanted the name for themselves. They saw their desires as the end instead of the means. According to the Talmud, so basically Hirsch is saying they replaced calling out in the name of God, which is the ultimate purpose of the temple, to calling out in their own name. That's the issue. The Talmud says, make us a name, refers to idolatry. Rashi says that they wanted to be, that they thought if they were united, they could defeat God. Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta gives the answer Bruce gave, that they said, lest we be scattered, so God scattered them. And that's exactly what Rabbeinu Bachya says. Their intention was to avoid being scattered, so that's why God scattered them, to show that he could defeat them. But here's what the Art Scroll says. And this is the point I think that I made, and hopefully I was trying to give a suggestion to it. The Art Scroll itself, and you see, by the way, they wrote this in the 70s, in 77. I don't think they would write this anymore today. This is the early Art Scroll. Somebody should, if you ever wanted to get like a beautiful PhD, somebody could write a study on the way Jewish theology developed in America by comparing Art Scroll written in 1970s to Art Scroll theology written into their translations in the year 2020s. And you'll see a big difference. But here's what they write. The Midrashim perceive sinister and idolatrous motives in their plan. Like they're drawing a distinction between Midrash and Pshat here. But unfortunately, the verses themselves close the doors upon mature reflection on the evil motives lurking within them. Meaning to say, the text doesn't tell us anything about their motives. The Torah did not reveal them. The Midrash alludes to this with the comment, the deeds of the generation of the flood are explicitly stated, but those of the generation of the dispersion are veiled. It doesn't explicitly reveal them. It doesn't explicitly reveal them. That's why I was suggesting this path, but Art Scroll itself is suggesting that it's opaque. So that's why I was suggesting the idea is that maybe the problem was they weren't ready for the unity. And unity before we're ready for it is destructive. Unity before we're ready for it is destructive. And it's actually the most destructive force on the world. You know, you can see this on the internet now. It's very scary that there are people who get out there and espouse the most vicious hatred, and they have millions and millions of followers, and that's incredibly scary. And that's unity. Isn't that unity? So okay, so now let's just end with one Hasidic idea. One Hasidic idea from this. Oh yes, okay, Deborah, sure. Of course.